Welcome to Wisdom Wednesday with Wholespire. Today's topic focuses on collaboration and how organizations can overcome challenges to leading partnerships with limited capacity and resources. We hope you'll take away important lessons, perspectives on challenges, and best practices on priority setting, coordinating activities, and measuring impact. Regardless of your field of interest, a group's capacity to be sustainable depends on its ability to strike a balance between its short-term activities with its long-term vision. I'm Meg Stanley, the Executive Director of Wholespire, and I'm joined today by Forrest Alton, who's co-founder and president of 1000 Feathers, and Lori Phillips, who is the Director of South Carolina's DHEC's Division of Nutrition, Physical Activity, and Obesity Prevention. Through a partnership called Healthy Palmetto, the three of us and our staffs have worked together, collaborating for several years to unify and mobilize organizations working on healthy eating and active living efforts in South Carolina. Our partners include academic institutions, agencies, nonprofit, private organizations, and funders that have statewide impact on healthy living in our state. Thank you both for joining me today for this conversation, and we really hope that our audience will be able to take away some of the lessons that we've learned and when working with this large group in multiple sectors.
It's great. I'm glad to be with you, Meg, and thanks for the introduction of the effort and the journey here. It's been a joy for 1000 Feathers to be on this journey with Wholespire and with DHEC and all of the partners of Healthy Palmetto. I'll just say as a very brief intro, right, there is no way we could talk about all of the work that Healthy Palmetto is doing, shine a light on all of the wonderful partners that deserve to be spotlighted, talk about every detail that it takes to run and manage a coalition successfully. That would take us 6, 8, 10, 20 webinars to do. But we're going to try to hit the high points in the next 30-ish minutes, right? And really glad to be here with you and Lori both. And, Lori, I'm going to start with you here. Meg showed a slide that talked about purpose and partners and those sort of things. But go back to the beginning, if you don't mind. Sort of what was the motivation to start Healthy Palmetto? I mean, coalition work is hard. It takes a lot of time. That's probably the motivation or the rationale behind the old adage. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. You made the choice to go together. Why? Why did we start a coalition?
Yeah, so in South Carolina, there have been efforts around statewide obesity prevention since 2005. There's been a state obesity plan in place since that time. And in 2019, that was wrapping up. So the plan that everybody's working together on was wrapping up. And so the group of partners that had been at the state level, sort of ushering that work along and monitoring progress, came together, and we had some real conversations about what comes next, what's needed, what are we committing to, and the group decided that they found value in the different partners that Meg mentioned, universities, state agencies, nonprofits, funders, all of them coming together, because what we know is what gets monitored gets done typically. And we felt that at that time, there was a lot more work to do, that we had not achieved what needed to be achieved for the state of South Carolina. And so that group very purposefully called themselves a leadership council. And so that's something I think is a good takeaway for others that are looking to do this kind of work, is really think about what you're calling yourself. Because the reason they landed on Leadership Council is that they wanted to lead the way to advance healthy eating and active living in the state of South Carolina. They didn't want to be an advisory council where you give advice to someone on how to do something. They didn't want to be a task force, which is typically more short term. We know this is a long-term commitment that we're making. And so it really was a continuation of past efforts and a purposeful, intentional conversation of people from different organizations coming together to lead the way, because we've still got work to do.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that sort of articulation of the history for sure. And this idea that words matter, right? And what we are calling things in councils and committees and coalitions. And sometimes we use all of those words as synonyms, but they really do mean different things and suggest different levels of partnership. Speaking of partnership, Meg, you have invited us into the Wholespire Wednesday webinar series here. This is great. You and Lori, and by extension, Wholespire and DHEC have a really neat partnership. I don't have a more eloquent word than neat. Sorry, an excellent partnership. It's also, though, a unique structure, right? This idea of public-private partnerships, I sometimes refer to as a unicorn. Everybody always talks about it. Nobody's ever actually seen it. But guess what? Wholespire and DHEC are in a true public-private partnership here in a sort of leadership convening role of the coalition. Can you just talk a little bit about how that's played out and why that has mattered to Healthy Palmetto's success?
I really think that it boils down to being able to leverage our expertise that each has, as well as the relationships and the technical capabilities of each of our groups. We have our unique structures and infrastructure, but we're able to complement each other. For instance, as a nonprofit and a private entity, Wholespire is able to offer some financial capabilities that then Lori and her division can actually provide that funding and the planning oversight. And we're able to work collaboratively and really build upon and expand our audiences, as well as really engage with people that we may not normally engage with. I think the success of any partnership, but particularly with a public-private partnership like ours, is really to have a values-based relationship and have really ongoing communication and really awareness of who is taking on what responsibility, and really trust at the end of the day that our expertise is going to work together, that our staff understands that we're not trying to replace the other. We're trying to really build our own capacity with the partnership.
I love it. Lori, anything you would add to that from the DHEC perspective?
Yeah, so I've worked in state government a long time, and I think the strengths that we bring is that we are a stable entity, a known entity. And Meg and I have had these conversations where sometimes because of that longstanding reputation that our division has, someone will pick up the phone for me, whereas they're not quite sure who Wholespire is, they may not, and vice versa. It's on the flip side as well. And so I think that stability, the well-known, you're a well-known entity. I think the ability to bring in federal funds from a state agency is an asset that we have. We do have that linkage to our national experts at the different national organizations to really tap us into best practices and federal resources and things like that. So I think there's that, but I think there's also in that stability, there's a little bit of an inflexibility with sometimes it takes a little bit longer for us to get things done. We have processes and procedures that a nonprofit like Wholespire doesn't have to jump through the hoops. I sometimes call myself a red tape sorceress because I can chop through this red tape, but it is red tape sometimes, and we all know that, and there's reasons for it, but you do have to navigate that quite a bit. And so in a nonprofit like Wholespire, they don't have those kind of challenges. They're a little bit more flexible. They've got communication type things that they can do that maybe a state agency shouldn't be doing. Advocacy is another thing that I think Wholespire brings to the table. And so I think it's that, plus we're both serving as we're loosely following a collective impact model for Healthy Palmetto, and so we're both joined on as backbone organizations. So I think that's a little bit unique. Typically you'll have one organization that serves that role, but we've made a concerted decision to do it together for the reasons we've already talked about, but also there's just sustainability comes when you work together like that, because like what if you have to be out? What if there's staff changes, things like that? And if you're only relying on one organization, sometimes all efforts can stop if you don't have a backup plan. And so by being partner backbone organizations, we sort of take care of some of those types of life situations that come up.
I love it. Before we go any further, Lori, the next time I go to your LinkedIn page, if it doesn't have red tape sorceress in your bio and description, I'm going to be very disappointed.
Now, this does not mean I don't have cuts and bruises from doing my sorceress work, but yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. The wounds to prove it, right? That we have navigated these challenges.
Scars.
Speaking of that, right? Healthy Palmetto, by any measure, has been a successful effort, has been a successful coalition. And again, one of the things I love about working with the two of you and the 20-something partners is this is a coalition that actually does have outcomes, tangible things it's trying to achieve, right? The outcome is not the meeting. Let me say that again. The outcome is not the meeting, even though we do have to get together, we have to convene, we have to meet. We'll get into the successes and outcomes of the work, right? In terms of healthy eating, active living, we're collectively working on telling those stories. But let's talk about the success of the coalition for a minute. And just in the last couple answers you all have given, I've heard words like leveraging strengths and engaging partners and trust and communication. So I may be answering the question while I'm asking it. But if you had to highlight 2 or 3 key traits, and I'd love to hear from each of you, 2 or 3 things that have allowed this coalition to be successful, what would you say those are? Meg, why don't you go first?
Well, I think we have touched on it a little bit, and you did as well. I think the big thing is the commitment and the prioritization of the work. That old adage of the grass is greener where you water it. And I think that being able to put dedicated time and energy and resources is first and foremost. And that's our expectation of ourselves and what we're in a position to be able to do that. And the constant communication that I spoke about a minute ago with the regular check-ins, and that those meetings have a purpose and those check-ins have a purpose, but they're leading us to those outcomes. And we are starting with the end in mind. And really going through that process, that decision-making process. And we're constantly evaluating what's working and what's not. The best laid plans sometimes have to take a little detour. So we're acceptable and adaptable to that and recognize it. And really being able to, in that, not only take that quantitative data, but the qualitative of the, what's working.
Good point.
Stumbling blocks along the way. Those are sort of, when I first think about that, would be the most succinct way to be able to say that. And then as backbone organizations, we're in the position to be able to dedicate staff time as a certain percentage of our work. It's largely, Lori and I talk multiple times a week, and it is being able to leverage that time and the conversations and recognizing and respecting the other people's time that is at the table as well.
I love it. Lori, what's on your list?
I know Meg did a great job, but
we're gonna let you go first next time, so Meg doesn't steal your answer.
That's okay. I do think, success, right? Thinking about what success is and having that common agenda that we're working towards is the key to even starting, like even the decision to start this up in 2019, 2020. Long-term commitment, but then being willing, like Meg said, to assess commitment as things change, because life happens, people's and organizations' priorities change, staffing changes. Maybe we're not going in the direction that brings value to an organization. So we have committed to assessing that at least on an annual basis, where organizations are, do they still find value? We assess whether we are adding value. This is a lot of work to not look at whether it's valuable to you as a person, you as an organization, and you as a group. Just doesn't make sense, because there's so much in this world to do that you have to assess that and make sure that, not to be wishy-washy and do it, every month or anything like that, but, at least on a regular basis to assess, is what we're doing not only working, but also still of value? And are we still all working towards that common goal? And if you're not, making sure that you address that. And so I think having somebody's job description, we've seen this with local coalitions across the state over the years. You've got to have somebody that it's their job description to keep the ball rolling, right? To keep people coming together, convening, the communicating, all the logistical pieces of it. If you don't have that, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to, the whole point is to go further, faster together. And if you don't have somebody that's sort of making sure that we're pushing forward, you can lose that a little bit and you end up wasting time.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to stay on this idea of a common agenda just for a second. A couple things that come to mind listening to both of you articulate those components of success. The first is, just to clarify, these are components of success for any coalition, right? It just so happens that our topic of interest is healthy eating, active living, but coalitions that are working on any number of social change type issues, these lessons have staying power for sure. Some of them, and Laura, you alluded to this earlier, have been sort of adopted or even adapted from a loose framing around collective impact, right? Or a loose following of that model. One of the things, though, that Healthy Palmetto is doing that connects to collective impact and otherwise is we've created a common agenda, right? And you've got 20-something partners, again, nonprofits, academic institution, researchers, practitioners, all of whom have their own mission, their own goals, their own staffing structures. Some of them are very small organizations, some are very large organizations, right? This whole diversity of partners, but yet when everyone is coming to the Healthy Palmetto table, as it were, there is a common agenda. How in the world did we get all of those people to lock in on a common agenda?
So that came in 2019, all those conversations. We had multiple facilitated discussions about who we are. Like, number one, do we need to exist? And if we do, who will we become and what are we coming together for? And so that unifying and mobilizing organizations working on healthy eating and active living in the state came from those 2019 sessions. And so, it really was, where is there a gap? What could we do that would bring value? What is our interest? And that's where that group landed. And we've sort of stuck with that, even as we've built out and brought more and more organizations to the table. There seems to be value in the unification and mobilization of efforts. Yes, we've got a lot going on in the state, but if we're not unifying it and getting to that common agenda together, we're losing something in that. We're not quite going to get where we're all trying to go. We could do it that way. I mean, absolutely. You see things happen all the time that happen that way. Everybody's on their parallel tracks working towards something, and they're just working as hard as their little heart. So let them work. And you may get there, and that's one path. We've chosen a path where we come together so that we're trying not to duplicate efforts. We're trying to maximize resources. We're trying to make sure we're having consistent communication just to make it easier, even though it's hard. To make the whole effort a little bit easier to understand, easier to know how to plug in, easier to know how to connect with each other. Because when we make those connections and we maximize those resources, it just benefits everybody. It's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah. Meg, certainly anything that you would add to that, but I want to also take this sort of one step further. I mean, the group has a common agenda, and then, under that, it's not really a hierarchy in this way, but under that, also 6 priority areas, right? And Lori, you were starting to allude to this. It's certainly something I believe in. Like, everything can't be top priority, right? That doesn't mean things aren't important or interesting or necessary, but figuring out how and where we focus is also important. So, Meg, common agenda, 6 priority areas, right? I mean, just help walk us through how all of this shapes out and why it matters.
I think ultimately is why it matters is because, as you both just said, we can't do it all. And if we can try to focus in, just like every organization has to say, what is the capacity, what is feasible, and let's start with data. So the group selected using the Trust for America's Obesity report, said, okay, here's a set of 13 evidence-based strategies. Let's review those. Let's look at these. We know the evidence exists. Let's take an assessment of who that's at the Healthy Palmetto table, or even who wasn't at the Healthy Palmetto table at the time, to say what organizations, what people are actually doing the work on these strategies already. Let's approach them. Let's find out what their needs are. So it reduced down to 6 based upon going to those organizations and asking. There were some organizations that said, yes, we are working on this strategy, but we have a lot of funding. We have a plan in place. We appreciate that you want to support this, but we don't thank you, but no thank you. And that was okay, because that was a mutual understanding that the capacity and the needs were being met, but let's have the door of communication open so that if you need something from us, let us know. And we in turn will also help share what you're producing, and let us help you tell the story. Others that just said, well, we're at really early stages. We don't really quite have our act together for this time frame yet, and we're not ready. And again, it was the same situation of honoring the capacity and not trying to duplicate those efforts and taking stock in what was being done. Yeah. So when it came down to it, there were these 6 priorities during that time period with organizations that needed assistance, and the assistance was wide open. Actually went through a series of pitches from them that we like to call, and tried to model it somewhat after the show Shark Tank. We were trying to have a little bit of fun with it. Let's see, what do you need? And really trying to get some innovative approaches to these strategies. And there were a few that the levels of need varied. And because of the engagement in the strategies was varied. A few needed straight up funding to do things like strategic planning, or, okay, we need a certain percentage of hours for this staff person to be able to do this work on this website, or do this work to implement these projects. It really varied. And then some that where 1,000 Feathers was really able to help us with was especially about the communications aspect for some of these, because you're doing the work, but then the story needs to be told. Right. And then having really facilitated thought-provoking avenues to get that story out there. We're going through some of this now as we sort of have wrapped up a cycle of these 6 priorities, and they continue to be a priority for us, but assessing this year, talking to those organizations, what do you need more? And as the group coming together, trying to decide, well, are there some additional areas that now we have the capacity to take on and help? Yeah.
I was smiling as you were talking. I had actually forgotten about the Shark Tank inspired pitch decks. That was a fun part of this process. Lori, I'm going to come back to you here, but I want to stay on this theme, right? We can, though, take it a little broader than the priority areas, all the way out to all the members of the coalition. One of the things you just heard Meg emphasize, which I think is so important, is this varying level of need, varying level of involvement, right? And Healthy Palmetto, in my slightly biased opinion, has been very good at allowing people to plug in where they can, allowing people to define or decide their individual level of participation, all the way from, and Lori, you said this earlier, Lori or Meg or staff at Wholespire and DHEC that like wake up every day thinking about these issues, all the way down to, Meg, you use the term, some people have said thank you, but no thank you, to priority areas or even to participating, and literally everything in between. Healthy Palmetto trying to continually figure out ways to say, no matter how much time, effort you can give, you've got a place here. I think that's really cool. How does that happen, Lori? I mean, that takes some discipline and some intentionality to be able to pull that off.
It does, and it takes assessing. Are you adding value? Are you doing it in a way that's the best way, easiest way, most comfortable way? And I think in that assessment, we were finding, which, you know, granted, we started Healthy Palmetto and we had one in-person meeting and then COVID happened. So we automatically should. So that plays into all of this too. And I'm very proud of us for being able to keep that ball up.
No kidding. No kidding.
Because
Yeah.
those challenges on top of everything, a lot of things I think just stopped, and we did not. We continued to push on. And so in that though, we were noticing, even though we had 20 plus organizations on the leadership council, the participation and engagement was not quite 20 plus. And so it's like, okay, what's going on here? We need to reevaluate where everybody is. And so that started that assessment of partners back last summer. And the intentionality came behind, you know, we really need to have a one-on-one conversation with each person. And sometimes people won't speak in a big group like that. So let's be intentional about it. And you have to vary your communication methods sometimes. And I think we've honored that and done that, because that takes more time when you're meeting, having 20 different one-on-one meetings with people versus one meeting with 20 people. But we did that to just make sure people were still finding value, still saw their fit. Before we met with them, we worked with Thousand Feathers to rethink our structure. Okay, are we giving people different levels that they can plug into to be involved? And we weren't. All we had was a leadership council. And so we reevaluated that, proposed a new structure when we met with our members one-on-one. And so we've got different levels now. You can be more committed and serve on an executive committee. That was new for us. You can continue at your leadership council level. In the past, we were meeting 6 times a year. We were moving that to 4 times a year. So it was a less commitment than they were currently doing. And then we've added strategic allies, which is much less commitment. That's for your organizations that want to be connected but can't commit. They don't have the capacity to come to meetings and really take on tasks and things like that. So again, it's just I think that again is a beauty of co-backbones, because if you're doing it by yourself, I don't know that I would have had the capacity to think about that on my own. But like when we're working together and you can bounce ideas off of each other, it's like, wait a minute, why are these 5 organizations not participating anymore? Why, like, have we reached out to them? What are we doing? And so just that backbone structure, I think, helped us in this, the recommendations from Thousand Feathers to relook at our structure helped us with this. And then our very intentional outreach to our members to just reassess, re-engage, and we've gained commitment. Now we have 40 organizations through that process. So
cool.
What we did was, it wasn't, I think I went into it thinking, well, people are going to fall off. We're not going to have 20 anymore. And we actually gained about double, you know, so anyway,
it's really neat.
It is that intentionality. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes energy, and you've got to be willing to do that.
Yeah. You're kind to shout us out there. Much like today's conversation, we just ask the questions and get out of the way, right? I mean, the real work happens among the partners, and it's such a great group. You know, this next sort of question is the one we need to ask. It's not as bright and shiny as the others, right? But while we've been very successful in this coalition, we've also, you know, fallen down and skinned our knee a couple times, right? There may be some things we could or should have done differently. I'm not going to stay here long, but if you look in the rearview mirror just for a second and say, oh, that thing, we probably should have done that differently. Share a lesson learned. Meg, I'll start with you. Share a lesson learned so that if I'm watching this webinar and I'm starting a coalition, you could say, hey, heads up, don't make this same mistake we made.
Well, I'm going to a little bit back it up a little bit to even Lori's talking about with some of the success is we had to take a left turn at a couple of places where really being flexible and respectful of people's capacity that Lori spoke about structure, that came about because we had people like, wait a minute, we have 20, but we don't have 20 on these calls. And it's recognizing when the calls are not being productive. You know, it's sort of that thing. Don't call a meeting just to call a meeting. Let's have people engaged. Well, it took those one-on-one conversations and realizing that there were people, and this happens all this time. This is sort of, we're all in different work groups or coalitions where someone is voluntold. Try not to practice that in our own organizations with our staff and ourselves, but recognizing what that then says, well, what is the leadership commitment that's there or not, and allowing them space to back off. And I would say that being clear on expectations is very important in this work, and don't expect people to commit and be engaged unless you have really giving them the tools, that conversation being a tool of what the expectation is. Then that way, nobody's hurt, nobody's harmed. And I would say that, you know, at the end of the day, we've talked a lot about being flexible and listening to people's needs. But I think at the end of the day is when we focus on the outcomes, and the outcomes are about people.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love it. Lori, what would you add?
So challenges, is that the question?
Yeah. Anything that as you
sideways there.
No. You see, Meg, it was just a masterful, like, let me take this challenge and turn it into a strength and opportunity. And I love it. But Lori, anything as you reflect back, a lesson learned, a challenge along the way that might help somebody working on a coalition in the future?
So I think we had a challenge with our structure. We identified it and we came up with a possible solution, and we're testing that now. And I think maybe that's the same thing you would do with any kind of challenge. So you identify it, you come up with a possible solution, and you test it. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, you re-identify it.
Right.
And go through your little cycle again. You have to be willing to do that. And sometimes that means looking at things that you don't want to look at and seeing that maybe something's not working. And a lot of times we're not honest with ourselves about that, because we might take that personally. Well, I must not be doing a good job if this is not going. You can't look at it that way.
Yeah.
If it's truly that you're all in it to make the world better, then you're going to have to assess those things and really just face them head on as soon as they come up, and do the best you can with what you've got. But you can't ignore that there are challenges, and you can't ignore that there are, like, if we had continued down the road of leadership council, and then what if more and more organizations stopped being engaged and we never did anything about it, we wouldn't be achieving anything. And so we would be wasting all this time and energy. And I don't know about y'all, but I feel like I want to put my energy towards good things every day when I wake up. And so I want to make sure that I'm doing something that's advancing and progressing and leading to positive change. And so you have to look at the things that maybe are sometimes hard to look at, and then take action on them.
I love that. And just hearing you say it out loud, Lori, is like, yeah, that's it. That's why we love working on this Healthy Palmetto project with your two organizations and all the other partners, right? This name it, fix it, name it, fix it. And there's this sort of constant assess, evaluate, understand, adapt, right? Move forward. It's really hard, but also really fun, right? And I'm a believer that those things don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? Like, but it's hard, man. It's hard. It'd be a lot easier at some level to just ignore all that stuff and just plow ahead, right? But that's not what success looks like. That's not what genuine engagement looks like, all those things. Um, I'm conscious of the time here. We could talk a lot longer. You both took challenges and spun them to be positives in the last question anyway, but let me change the lens just a little bit. Something that you're really looking forward to, or one last sort of piece of advice that you might share to the folks that are joining us for the webinar today. In other words, your closing thought from each of you.
Lori, you want to go first?
Sure. It is difficult. This work is difficult. It can get frustrating. It can feel like you're not moving forward, and just know that you're not alone if you feel that way. However, what we do know, everybody should know this, one entity, person, organization is not going to solve big complex issues by themselves. And so why not be part of something greater than yourself and have a contribution to that? And that's all we're trying to do with Healthy Palmetto, is provide the space for us to work together and each of us contribute in the way that we can toward that common agenda, towards that greater good. And so I think there's a lot of different social issues, a lot of different topics that you could plug in instead of healthy eating and active living. Like, you can take what we've done and duplicate that, but just know going into it that it is hard. You are going to get frustrated. It is going to feel like you're one step forward, two steps back, sometimes staying completely still, not anything moving. That's normal. It's normal for trying to move. This is hard work. You're moving groups of not only people with personalities, but organizations with different missions and visions and priorities. It's going to take time. So you've got to be willing to put the commitment in for long term. This is not a 3-month project, right? This is not project management. This is collaboration and true collective impact, and true we're working together for the long term, for the betterment of society, which does take time. And so I'd say, if you know that going into it, just know that you're not alone in those challenges, but that we've given you plenty of examples of how you can overcome challenges. You've just got to be open and willing to do that.
Awesome. Meg?
I'd say ditto first.
Yeah, right. Right.
It's difficult, and but it is personally rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
And I think being able to maintain a long-term vision and then layer in reality along the path, along the journey, and it is really important. And I think that's what we've done, what we've been trying to do. And we had to have some serious challenges and perhaps almost falling on faces a couple of times to be able to do that, and to take inward and outward assessment of situations. And I think also just along the way, and I think that this is very applicable to whatever group you're trying to gather, is to look at it as a professional development opportunity and a personal opportunity, because it's about relationships and honoring the different spaces and trying to lift each other up.
Yeah. That is an important reminder, right? That, we see organization logos on a PowerPoint slide or on a visual or something, but at the end of the day, it's still a group of people functioning together, and those relationships matter. Let me take just a quick second of moderator privilege here as we wrap up, and I'll give you my closing thought. leveraging strengths, engaging partners, staying committed, all of the things that you all said, really, really important components to making a coalition work. The part that I know both of you well enough that you won't say is that leaders have to lead, and the two of you have been exceptional leaders in this effort. And all of the partnerships and all of the engagement and all of the work of all of the members is important. But I've also seen too many coalitions where a leadership structure or leadership organizations or individuals don't emerge who are willing to take on some leadership responsibility. And the two of you and your organizations have done that. And I just want to shout you out for that. And Meg, thanks for inviting us into your space. Thanks for allowing me to sit and ask some questions. I learned some things. I'm confident that people watching the webinar have learned some things. But I think at this point, I turn this back over to you to wrap things up.
Well, thank you, Lori and Forrest, for joining us today, and for everybody who is listening. And again, it is for our Wisdom Wednesdays. Webinars will continue, but if you would like more information on Healthy Palmetto, on the screen there is the website, and we will be, continuing the discussions on our collaboration and our initiatives. You will be able to get updates from us. But if you would like to join us next month for Wisdom Wednesday, we'll be talking with our partners from Kids in Parks and Trailblazing for Tomorrow, cultivating healthy habits through trails and outdoor time. And really appreciate everybody who joined us today. And if you will take a moment to follow the screen instructions to provide us some feedback.